Hi, everybody, and welcome to our podcast. Once again, uh, keeping it real in coastal North Carolina. It's so good to take time to look at these videos, and we appreciate so much that you guys are finding these videos helpful and useful. Well, we hope you do anyway. And we're trying to create some interesting content, and sometimes these might be like kind of brief, and sometimes they might be a little bit longer. And we're certainly glad to address topics that you find interesting. So if you come up with topics that you think might be of interest to you or consumers in the Brunswick County or Columbus County markets in coastal North Carolina, we're certainly glad to address them. And that's what we're looking to do. And whether it be some things to do with some of the challenges we have in our counties and our coastal regions, whether they be socioeconomic or whether they be housing in general or affordability of housing or financing of housing. We are certainly glad to address those topics, and we appreciate you all watching. And I know Misty, I guess I should introduce first. I'm Bob Deppy, owner of Blue Chip Real Estate, and with me, of course, is our wonderful co-host Misty Sign, also of Blue Chip Real Estate. And again, thank you for visiting our podcast. So, Misty,
Absolutely.
I'm just going to let you just ask the question, and let me just
Alright. Yeah,
try
because 'cause
to.
I've always got I'm always full of questions,
You are
but
you are the question girl, for sure. And I
but
don't always have the answers, so maybe I do, maybe I
well,
don't. But if I don't, I'll go out and find them.
I know you do. I mean, because I've asked you a few and you've went and found the answer. But, we were talking about this and a little bit earlier about, you've been doing real estate for many years and you've noticed the changes that consumers face, especially, when they're searching for a home. And over the years, it's changed. I mean, since I've been in real estate, it's changed. I mean, it used to be, the only way a buyer would ever find a home was through a realtor. But now, realtors now have MLS and all of the realtors come together on MLS and, that's where your stockpile of homes are. So over the years, I mean, can you elaborate a little bit, how does this affect the buyer in your opinion?
Okay. Okay. So a little history on how buyers searching for homes, how that has evolved over the years. Okay. So, back in my early days, and we're not talking that long ago. We're really historically, we're not really talking that many years ago. But prior, and don't hold me to these dates, okay? I'll be on or about dates, okay? I hate that phrase, on or about dates. So let's say prior to 1995, maybe 96, okay? There was really only one way to find homes for a buyer. If somebody was interested in purchasing a home, whether it be a first time home buyer or, someone who's had multiple homes, there was really only one way to access information in connection to a piece of real estate. And that was through your local realtor. And, realtors had a very strong protection of the inventory that was displayed to the consumer. Okay. Realtors basically controlled the inventory. They controlled, well, maybe they didn't control the inventory itself, but they controlled the access to the inventory. And in my early days, you know, um, this little thing was evolving called the internet. It really wasn't even developed, and it was very primitive at the time. And I remember in my local market, in my former market, we had an intranet that was a very specific, non-web based search mechanism just for realtor members. It was an MLS, of course, a multiple listing service, and largely the realtors controlled the access to that multiple listing service data. Okay. It was controlled by the realtor members. And back in those days, which sounds like a million years ago, but it really wasn't that long ago, that data was really heavily protected by the realtors. I mean, like, you couldn't get access to real estate without a realtor member, unless you had the occasional for sale by owner that brought a house to the market. And I can tell you many years, our basic form of marketing would be, black and white 2-line ad in the local newspaper that said, 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch, Poughkeepsie, New York, 99.99. Call Bob, and my phone number, and that was it. That's how we marketed homes back then. So, which was very common. It was customary. That was the way it worked. And then this little thing came along called the internet, which revolutionized the the industry. It completely changed the way that consumers were finding real estate. And what developed after that, now, Misty, I don't, you know, without sharing your age, I'm pretty sure you can remember the evolution of the internet.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it was a big thing, and everything seemed to change when the internet came into the picture. Everything around us seemed to change. The way you
And it did.
banked, I mean,
And it did.
everything. The way you bank, the way you pay bills. I mean,
Mm,
everything
evolved.
changed.
Yeah. Yeah. And some would argue that it was a very, very good thing, and some would argue that this has not been the best thing in the world. But life changes and technology changes, certainly. So what happened was, and I'm going to say roughly in 1996, the department. Well, let me back up. Prior to 1996, the National Association of Realtors developed their own website where they were exposing the inventory in a public manner, public facing um, website that was called Realtor, all capital letters, realtor.com. So realtor.com was probably the first, maybe it wasn't 100%, but it was fed by data that was extrapolated from all multiple listing services across the country, and it was a public facing website, and it gave the consumer access to the listing inventory, and it later gave access to, well, it basically gave access to all consumers to search for real estate online. This was revolutionary at the time. And then almost immediately, all kinds of entrepreneurs started developing these websites. And I remember when the National Association of Realtors spent several $1,000,000 to develop this, massive database of website, which was relatively a new thing. And it was like frightening. I mean, like, oh my God, we're giving away our data. Everybody was freaking out. But it evolved and it developed, and then realtor.com became a very, very popular search mechanism. And uh and then something magical happened after that. Um realtor.com was not the only act in town.
Mm-mm.
Okay. And then along came a company called Trulia and another company called Zillow.
Zillow.
And then within a matter of a year or two, hundreds of real estate specific websites started to just emerge on the web. And boom, in a matter of a year or two, this all evolved, this all developed, and consumers were largely had open access to all of this inventory. And ultimately they would start their search for a piece of real estate and ultimately find their way to a realtor to actually turn the key and show the home. And
Right.
you know how we've been doing this. We
Mhm.
sometimes sometimes a buyer or consumer might find a piece of real estate before we do, and it happens that way, and realtors, became the access points. But basically what happened is we, as realtor members, we kind of lost a little bit of control of that data, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And how would you say now that AI is in the picture? How is that affecting it?
Well, that's a really great question. So, I mean, you always ask the best questions. So, this evolution turned into something bigger because the Department of Justice saw that of course, as they do, the Department of Justice saw that the consumer was not being properly served. So what they did was they launched multiple lawsuits against the National Association of Realtors, multiple listing services. I'm a little vague on all of it. This was right, right around the mid 90s, 96, I think was when it all developed. And they formalized the concept that consumers should have free and ready access to inventory, and that if a buyer was going to look for a home, all inventory should be found on third-party websites such as Zillow and Trulia, and they largely started controlling it through a series of lawsuits. But your question was awesome because in between that period of time, between 96 roughly and today, um, it's like this fire hydrant of data that comes out. And interestingly, a lot of that data is not accurate. You know, the only true way for a consumer to find active inventory is to go through your realtor. That's the
Yeah.
only true way to find the real true inventory of homes. Specifically, the accuracy of the listing inventory and the data. And over the past 30 years or so, this has morphed into a massive industry with more players than we can count. And it's gotten to the point where it's become not just become a massive industry, it's become very clumsy and cumbersome to the point where there's companies out there that are actually thinking of ways to streamline it and kind of go back to the old MLS days and controlling the data. Where that's going to go, I don't know. But let me answer your question about AI because AI has had and will continue to have a very serious uh, impact on the way the consumer finds homes because now the average buyer can just go right to their smartphone and they can say, hey, show me the last 10 properties that were listed in Southport, North Carolina in a price point between 350 and $400,000 and blink, it'll come up in an eye blink,
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, and the consumer will be flooded with this data. So now, not only we have all these third-party websites, but we've got AI being used for the consumer to find those properties, and they might even say, like, who's the best real estate professional in Brunswick County, North Carolina, and hopefully they're going to find blue chip real estate. But the reality is that AI has a significant impact, or should be soon having a significant impact on how the consumer finds the properties, and they may circumvent these third-party websites and go to one person again. So many things are evolving and developing, but the history of how the consumer is finding the properties has really, really changed. And
Well, I mean, and I
so
say it all the time, everybody has a phone. I mean, there is
everybody
not
has a phone.
everybody
It's
has a phone and it's always right in front of
it's
them,
always right
and,
there. Yeah.
you know, it's so easy for them to find what they're looking for off of their phone. I mean, whether,
That's true.
you're buying or selling or looking for a realtor. I mean, you know, all you have to do is go in here and say something. You can even talk to it
You
and it'll
talk to your
answer.
phone. Yeah, show me those 10 properties, and they're probably gonna be dumping third-party websites in your phone, but they're just gonna dump addresses on you,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the seller will I mean, the buyer will, find the, listing agent. Here's what's really interesting, Misty. So in the last year or so, there's been multiple lawsuits between some of these third-party vendors and then real estate brokerages. There's been a lot of lawsuits about this, and it's all, trying to control the data, the information, you know? Um, which love it or hate it, one thing that's realtors are people that know how to evolve. Most realtors are very nimble and they know how to change and work with the times. Um, but there's a couple of real estate companies that are starting to see how this AI development is going to affect their business. And they're actually looking to kind of hoard that inventory on their websites. They're trying to gather up as much inventory on and get it on their website so the consumer only goes to their websites. And love it or hate it, whether it's going to be successful or not. Personally, I don't think it's going to be that successful. But it's this evolution of how the average buyer is going to find a home. Okay. And, when you think about it, gosh, 35 years ago, the black and white ad in your local newspaper, 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch
I
in
can't
Poughkeepsie,
even
New
tell you
York.
the last time I bought a newspaper.
Exactly. Exactly. But, that was the primary mechanism for the average buyer to engage in the search of a piece of real estate. In other words, that was marketing. There
Well,
were other
and
ma
now Facebook. I mean,
Oh my
Facebook is a
god.
big marketing. I mean, I use it. I mean, to me, Facebook is the best way to reach people.
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean
social media is a very, very
because
powerful way.
very so many people are on Facebook, and of course you're on it now if you're watching this. I mean, that is like the best marketing tool ever. And that's why I'm wondering if anybody who's watching this now, if you can comment below, what's your way to search for a home if you're
That's a
searching
really
for a home?
I would love to hear what our viewers have to say. That's a great idea, Misty. I would love to hear what our viewers say. How do you look? How do you find stuff?
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
just
are
comment below and or if you don't
Yeah,
wanna, if you don't wanna show your name, just send me a message or something or send Bob a
yeah,
message and let
yeah.
us know because I'm just curious how I mean, what's your go-to place to find if you are in the market or you've been in the market, what's your go-to? How do you search for a home? I mean,
Well,
I know
let
how
me
I
assure
searched for my home when
Yeah,
we moved
yeah,
here and,
yeah.
I mean, but I mean,
Hey,
because of course I
what
moved
do I
from a
do
different
if I'm out
yeah.
traveling and I'm curious about real estate? What's the first thing I do? I mean, I go to my phone and I look at local markets through one of the third party websites, Zillow
Right.
or Homes.com or whatever, and those tools are, very, very, they're very, very functional. Love them or hate them, it doesn't matter. They're very, very functional. But let me assure our viewers who are home sellers, when you work with Blue Chip Real Estate, our job is to promote your home, expose your home, market your home, and we will use every technology that it's available to us in order to do that. And it likewise for our buyer clients, if you're looking for a property, we will do whatever we have to do to uncover the most recent inventory for you. And this evolution of searching for properties is not going to change like slowly. It's happening in an eye blink. It's
I
really
agree.
happening fast, and we're trying to be as nimble as we can so that we don't miss opportunities for our buyers or our sellers. Well, Misty, it was a really good question. I hope our viewers weren't too bored with the history. Of course, I find it fascinating because I'm kind of a dork about it. I'm certainly the guy that has been around a little bit long enough to know how it's evolved. I mean, I clearly remember when we used to have to drive across town to get keys for houses and all that stuff,
Obviously, if you
but I'm
had to
not
find
that
an
old,
ad in a newspaper, I mean
better than finding an ad in a newspaper, that's for sure. Well, I thank all of our viewers, and again, we would love to hear your comments. And if you really want to get super nerdy, Misty and I are always glad to talk about this because it is an evolution. It's changing. The industry is changing. Our profession is changing. Consumer demand is changing. But we sure appreciate it. One thing is always for certain: when you talk to the blue chip real estate agents, we're always going to do one thing that never changes. We're never going to change world class experiences for our clients. So thank you for taking the opportunity to watch this. Misty, I thank you
hey,
so
thank
much
you.
for asking these interesting questions. And we hope you enjoy this podcast and future ones as well. Keeping, keeping it real
Keeping
in
it
coastal
real.
North
Hey,
Carolina.
we're keeping it real, Bob.
We're
We're
keeping
keeping
it
it
real.
real.
We can't even spit out the words. Keeping it real in coastal North Carolina. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video and this podcast.
Right. Bye, guys.